States.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. This is why people hate government and don't trust government. Director Peters, you're the director of the Bureau of Prisons, is that right?
That's correct, sir.
You used to run the correction system in Oregon, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Oregon legalized drugs, is that right?
That's correct.
Oregon's about to reverse that, is that correct?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the policy proposed to reverse that.
Oh, you just ignored Oregon?
Oregon still has a very special place in my heart, sir.
Okay. You haven't read any of the articles about the reversal?
I haven't, Senator.
You don't know anything about it?
Correct, sir.
Okay, wow. You're in charge of implementing the First Step Act, Director?
That's correct.
How many criminals have you released under the First Step Act?
So First Step Act for the overall release since the initiation of the First Step Act is, I have that exact number in front of me.
You don't know off the top of your head?
Sorry, Senator. So 70% of those that were released, we have about 30,000 individuals that have been released since the passage of the First Step Act.
All right, so you've released 30,000 criminals under the First Step Act. Okay? And how many of them, before you released them, did you contact any of their victims to say we're about to let this guy out?
Senator, it's my understanding that that notification happens through the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I will check into that and get back to you.
You don't know?
Senator, I don't.
Have you followed up with the U.S. attorneys to say, do you have a system to say, hey, we're about to let this guy out? Would we want to be sure the victim's contacted?
As a former victim's advocate, I share that value, that victim notification should happen. I'll check on the process. And
But
I'll
you
get back
don't
to
know
you.
if it's happening?
That's correct, Senator.
Wow. Okay, of the 30,000 criminals you let free, how many of them have come back? Have committed a crime again, hurt somebody else?
So that number is one that we're still looking at as it relates to the recidivism rate for those that were released on the First Step Act.
You don't have any idea?
No, Senator.
You don't have anybody at the Bureau that can count?
I do not have that number in front of me today.
So let me get this straight. The First Step Act was passed in 2018. This is 2024. Am I right so far?
That's correct.
That's 6 years. And in 6 years, you've let 30,000 criminals go, right?
That's correct.
And you don't have the slightest idea how many of them committed another crime and came back.
I don't have that number in front of me today,
And you
sir.
run the Bureau of Prisons.
That's correct.
And how many employees do you have?
About 40,000 employees.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. General, I know you got a lot to do, but could you give us a hand here? And let's find out whether the First Step Act worked. And how many, if we've released 30,000 criminals after 6 years, our director here doesn't know how many have committed another crime and come back? Can you help us?
Senator, I can certainly follow up on that issue. I will just say in terms of work we've done in the past, for example, on compassionate release, and going to the Bureau of Prisons, this is before Director Peters was there, and asking them for data on compassionate release, because that was one of the issues that has come up.
Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm not talking about compassionate release.
No, I understand.
You know,
I'm
my
just saying-
colleagues said we were told that it would save money and it would be in the interest of public safety to release criminals from prison. I didn't vote for it, but the majority rules. And so Congress did it. And Ms. Peters, Director Peters at the Bureau of Prisons, and her colleagues released 30,000 criminals, all of whom are there for a reason, okay? They didn't just go to prison for a free toaster. They were there for a reason. And so her department let them go, and after 6 years, we don't have the slightest idea. Not a single one of the 40,000 of her employees know how many have committed a second crime and come back. So how the hell are we supposed to figure out whether it worked?
Senator,
Your people ought to hide their head in a bag, Director. that you can't come here in front of this Congress and answer that question? I'm sorry, I interrupted you with my speech.
No, that's okay. I was just going to, my bottom line point on it was, I've often looked to those questions on things like compassionate release and other programs. And one of the challenges we found is the department just doesn't have good data on that. Halfway houses. Congress is spending about $500 million a year on halfway houses. There's really not great recidivism data on that either. How well are they working?
Before we do this, we need to find out. Look, I believe in justice. I believe in treating everybody fairly. But there are people out there, I don't know why, if I make it to heaven, I'm going to ask. They're not mixed up. They're not confused. They're not sick. It's not that their mama or daddy didn't love them or not enough. They just hurt other people, and they take other people's stuff, and we have to separate them from society. And the director let 30,000 of these folks go and can't tell me today how many have come back. I just find it takes my breath away. With 40,000 people. How many of your 40,000 people are actually coming to work or are still working from home, Director?
The supermajority of our employees come to work every day because we're running 24/7
What percentage are coming to work every day?
The percentage is quite high. I don't have the exact
You
number.
don't know?
But
Well, maybe there's your problem.
the supermajority of our individuals come to
If
work
they're not coming
at
to
our
work, they
institutions.
can't give us the answer. I've gone over. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. This is why people hate government and don't trust government.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Peters, one of President Biden's first acts after taking office was to issue Executive Order 14006, mandating that contracts with privately owned detention facilities not be renewed. The order is intended, quote, to decrease incarceration levels by reducing profit-based incentives to incarcerate by phasing out the federal government's reliance on privately operated criminal detention facilities. This order has created many unintended consequences, including the closing of the Willacy County Regional Detention Facility in Raymondville, Texas. The decision has had tremendous negative consequences with little to no obvious upside, forcing inmates to travel hundreds of miles round trip for court appearances, impacting the accessibility of legal counsel, and making family visits significantly more difficult. It has also caused administration issues for the prison system and harmed the local economy by eliminating these jobs. Literally every stakeholder that has a role to play in these cases is opposed to this Biden policy. That includes the defense bar, the federal public defender, the U.S. attorney, even the federal bench. All have publicly asked for this policy to be rescinded. Unfortunately, as with the open borders under Joe Biden, the Biden administration doesn't give a damn about how their woke policies actually affect South Texas or the lives of regular people. Ms. Peters, how has Executive Order 14006 impacted the Bureau of Prisons' ability to house inmates, and has it been a negative impact or a positive impact?
Thank you, Senator. So we were able to come into compliance with the executive order the end of last November and bring in those individuals from those facilities that were closed, and we were able to safely absorb them into our current population.
Okay, that you didn't answer my question. How has it impacted the BOP, and has it been positive or negative?
Senator, I don't know that I can put it in a positive or negative category. What I can say
is the defense bar and the U.S. attorney and the federal bench, are they all wrong?
I'm not familiar with their opinions and their reasons for opposing.
Okay, unfortunately, you're illustrating that the Biden administration doesn't care about South Texas if you don't even know the impact it's having on all the stakeholders. All right, let's shift to the topic Senator Lee was just asking you about, because I have to say I found your answers to him thoroughly unacceptable. The 2022 Transgender Offender Manual issued by the Bureau of Prisons through your predecessors reverted back to the Obama administration's initial designation and housing programming assignments. Notably, biological sex at birth is no longer the controlling determinant. Right now today, how many biological males are housed in female prisons under BOP?
Senator, I don't have those numbers in front of me today.
Why don't
but
you?
We could look at them and get back to you.
Why don't you?
I
Did
just
you-
don't have them top of
Did you
mind.
know you were going to be asked that today?
No, Senator.
Oh, you didn't. Have you been asked that before?
On the record, Senator?
Yes.
I don't recall.
You were asked a year ago in writing, and you failed to answer it in writing. You knew damn well you're going to be asked it today, but you don't want to answer it. Senator Lee asked, why don't you report the numbers? You don't report the numbers because you don't want people to know the numbers. So the fact that you sit there and say, I don't know, he said 1,300. Is that number in the ballpark?
1,300 as it relates to which category, Senator?
Biological males housed in female prisons.
No, that would be a much larger number.
Which is a larger number?
So the number of individuals who even identify as transgender at the Federal Bureau of Prisons is around 1,700. And the number of individuals that are housed in institutions not conforming with their biological sex are very low.
Very low. Are we talking 100? Are we talking 10? Are
We will look at the numbers. We're talking less than 10.
So your testimony here, I just want to understand, your testimony here today is there are fewer than 10 biological males, human beings that were born male, who are housed in female prisons. Is that your testimony?
That is my understanding, and I will confirm that and get back to you.
Okay. Of the 1,700 prisoners you referenced, how many of them are convicted sex offenders?
I do not know the answer to that, Senator.
Are you aware that Great Britain's numbers, according to a January 2022 report, is the proportion of male-born transgender offenders who are sex offenders in the UK prison system is roughly 60%, significantly higher than the 18% of the general population? Are those numbers consistent with the American numbers?
I'm not familiar with Great Britain's numbers.
So let me ask you this. How many female inmates have been sexually assaulted by biological males who BOP has housed in female prisons?
Senator, I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Do you have an obligation to protect those female prisoners?
Absolutely.
And so have you examined how many women have been sexually assaulted by biological males that BOP has placed in the prison with those women?
I have not, Senator, but I will tell you that safety and security and the placement of every individual in our custody is top of mind and the most important.
So if it's top of mind, why haven't you examined how many have been sexually assaulted? This is an obvious question. If you put a man with male genitals, with a male body in a female prison who's a convicted sex offender, it's not rocket science that there's a real risk those women are going to be victims of sexual assault. How is it possible that you haven't even asked the question, how many women are getting sexually assaulted because of the policies of the Biden administration?
Senator, I assure you that safety and security of these individuals are top of mind. And
So you haven't asked the question?
If there was misconduct, those individuals would be held accountable.
Senator Cotton.
Ms. Peters, it came to my attention that members of this committee submitted written questions the last time you appeared, and I don't think we've gotten responses back. Are you aware of that?
I am, Senator.
Can we count on getting responses to those questions soon?
We are working diligently to get those responses back to you.
What's been the long delay?
You know, it's been a long process. We always want to get these answers right, and there's a review process going back and forth between the Federal Bureau of Prisons and the department to ensure that our answers are consistent with department
Can we get a date certain,
policies
like
and practices.
maybe a month from today, October 13th?
Senator, I would love a date certain. Unfortunately, I cannot provide that to
So
you.
no, and I assume you won't provide a date certain any new questions we have then either, right?
That's correct, Senator.
All right, you mentioned in your opening statement you talked to stakeholders and something called justice-involved individuals. What's a justice-involved individual?
Someone who has been involved in the criminal justice system.
So a criminal.
Criminal or victims. We had a listening session
Okay.
where victims also discussed the impact of the
The
criminal
reason we don't
justice
just call
system
them criminals and victims?
Pardon me?
Is there a reason we don't just use plain English and call them criminals and victims?
Justice-involved individuals is a term that I use regularly.
Okay. You said that you'd been to 20 prisons in the last 12 months. That's about once every 2.5 weeks. On average, how many hours do you spend in a correctional facility when you visit it?
Probably 6 or more hours when I'm visiting.
Okay, so close to a full working day when you're there.
Yes.
How many of those hours do you spend on average with your correctional officers?
Well, when I am there, I spend about an hour with my executive team that's on the ground locally, and then the rest of it is walking the halls of the institution. and I try to stop and talk to every correctional officer.
Any
that-
organized sit-down with correctional officers?
We had an organized sit-down with our national union, but it's more walking and talking and meeting with them one-on-one at their post. I prefer that over pulling them off their post to have a conversation.
Got it. Have you visited the Forest City, Arkansas institution?
No, I have not.
Would you like to join me on a visit there?
I'd be happy to join you on a visit.
Because, you know, the incoming union chief who's taking over from Shane Fauci, Brandy White, is an officer at Forest City. I wish we would have had a second panel today with them. We had one last year, but I guess the chairman didn't want to have a second panel with the union members today. I want to touch this augmentee issue. Last year, we passed a law that required your employees to spend 90% of their time on their primary responsibility. If you're a correctional officer, 90% on corrections. If you're an HVAC technician, 90% on HVAC. What is the status today of the 90% requirement? Are you meeting that requirement?
We are working hard to meet that requirement.
That sounds like a no.
And so we are continuing to battle our recruitment and retention
80%?
issues. I don't have,
70%?
yeah, I don't have an overall number for you, Senator.
How can you not have an overall number of what your core officers are doing? Not research associates, not administrative assistants, but these, like this, they perform the mission of your organization, and you don't know how much time they're spending?
Senator, it changes every day and is different at every
There's got
single
to be an average,
institution.
though.
I don't have an average, Senator.
I mean, hitters go over 4 in a day, but they can still hit 350 in the season. There's got to be an average. I'm disappointed you don't have an average. This is not, it's not like some political hot potato. I'm not asking you about men who claim to be women to go into women's prisons. This is like a core responsibility of your organization. Let's turn to why you're not meeting that staffing numbers. You said in your written testimony that you're at 88% funded positions. How many correctional officer positions did the president request and Congress authorize and fund for 2023?
Senator, I don't have that number in front of me, but we can certainly get back to you.
20,446. Do you know what it was last year?
No, Senator.
20,446. How many correctional officers are currently employed?
We, like you just mentioned, the percentage is 88% of the
No,
funded
correctional
numbers.
officers, not total slots, correctional officers. How many do you have?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I can get it and get back to you, Senator.
Ms. Peters, again, these are your primary employees. These are the meat eaters, not the leaf eaters that do all the other jobs. And you don't know how many you have employed? Do you think it's, if you have 20,446 authorized, do you think it's 18,000?
Senator, I know that the number is 88% of those funded positions.
No, that's your total positions.
Yes.
Do you think it's closer to 8,000 or 18,000 correctional officers?
I think it's closer to 18,000, but we can get that number
so-
and get back to you.
Kind of right in the middle, maybe a little on the verging towards 8,000. It's 12,731, which say 60% that you had authorized for last year and this year. Yet you're boasting of an 88% total employment rate. And then you're complaining that you don't have enough officers to meet the 90% requirement that we mandated, that President Biden signed into law. It sounds to me like you need to spend a lot more time and money focused on hiring the people who are performing your organization's chief responsibility and less support personnel. Why is your organization at 88% total, but your core job only at 60%?
So, Senator, I don't know what that number is, so I'm not going to say on the record that it's 60%, but we'll get that number and get back to you. But I will tell you all of the majority of our recruitment efforts over the last year has been for those correctional officers.
But you're not meeting it. You're at 88% for overall employees, which includes all those leaf eaters I mentioned. You're at barely 60% for your meat eaters, the people who are doing the main mission of your job. It seems, my time's up here, but it seems to me like the BOP needs to do a much better job recruiting and hiring corrections officers, since that is what you actually do is corrections, and much less time hiring all these other support personnel and headquarters personnel. I look forward to seeing you in Forest City.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Peters, for being here and for your service.
Thank you, Senator.
Nearly 1 year ago, we held a hearing. I think we're 2 weeks shy of being 1 year from that hearing. Immediately following that hearing, I submitted a short list of questions to you and have not yet received a response. It was during that hearing that a couple of my colleagues asked you about timely responses to questions from this committee, and you acknowledged that it was important to do that. Can you tell me why you haven't responded to my questions yet? These are not difficult questions, and most of our nominees respond within a week or so of getting them.
Thank you, Senator. So I, too, am disappointed that those questions, for the record, have not yet been answered. We have been working on them diligently over the last year. It has been a lot of back and forth with the department. I was hoping that they would be cleared this week. They're not yet. That being said, we have done other things. We've increased the number of employees in our legislative affairs, so the individual requests that we have received over the last year.
Can you tell me
have been
when
more
I can
timely.
receive a response to those questions?
I don't have a specific date for you,
Okay.
Senator, but I know we're working on them.
Okay, I'd appreciate it if you could get back to me by the end of this month. That would be 1 year from the date of the hearing, and I don't think that's too much to ask. One of the reasons I'm asking about this, and I hate to pester you on that, it's just we do need answers to those questions. They're important. Among the questions that have been asked of you relate to how we separate out male and female prisoners. We do this for good reasons, reasons that relate to human biology, differences between the sexes, and there are a lot of questions that we have about how we do this. It's quite concerning that the number of female inmates who have become pregnant during the course of their confinement in BOP custody is not zero. And it's even more concerning that a substantial number of those pregnancies are the result of the BOP forcing female prisoners to share their facilities with biologically male prisoners. It's really concerning. Now, in January of 2022, the Bureau of Prisons adopted definitions that have an impact in the area that I'm asking about. Definitions for words like gender, gender nonconforming, gender affirming, and cisgender. For example, the Bureau of Prisons must now look at gender as, quote, a construct used to classify a person as male, female, both, or neither. Gender encompasses aspects of social identity, psychological identity, and human behavior, close quote. Now, I understand there are lots of feelings, lots of different beliefs about those things. But what I find most alarming about this is that notably absent from that list are things that you might expect to see, that you might think should at least be taken into account. Things like biological sex, like reproductive organs, the presence of a Y chromosome, or something as simple as a 5 o'clock shadow or an Adam's apple. Is biology now a verboten subject when you determine which prison you're going to send a prisoner to be incarcerated in? Is that now off limits?
No, Senator. In fact, I would present to you today that the majority of those in our care and custody are housed in facilities based on their chromosomal distinctions.
The majority of them, as we've always done, and as any sane prison system always would. The majority of them, that's good to know. But why not all of them? Why would you ever subject female inmates in particular, who face a series of biological disadvantages relative to male prisoners, face a number of vulnerabilities that male prisoners don't face? Why would you ever subject female inmates to being incarcerated against their will with biologically male prisoners? Can you tell me when that's ever justified?
So we also recognize, as do many experts, that a person may identify as a different gender than their biological one, and we recognize that at the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
Okay, but a prisoner, as I understand it, need only convince a single Bureau of Prisons psychologist to sign a form to have their identity considered for a transfer. Just one person. And the request then has to be approved, but that's really all that has to happen. It's almost a turnkey situation. They convince one psychologist and the whole process is set in motion. And yet, it's my understanding that BOP doesn't publish statistics on the number of inmates who are assigned to a prison that doesn't conform with their biological sex. Why is that?
So, Senator, while that frontline counselor starts the process is very complex. It's a multidisciplinary team that includes experts from psychology and health services and corrections that make that final determination around
So why
housing.
doesn't it publish the statistics?
Senator, I don't know why we don't publish the statistics, but I can look into that and
Okay,
get back to you.
that'd be great. If you would publish that, I would appreciate it. Now, some have estimated that the number is around 1,300. as of January 2022. To the extent that that estimate was even in the ballpark, it's undoubtedly higher now, the longer that this stays intact. That is not an insubstantial number, especially when you consider the fact that most prisoners in America are not in BOP custody. That is, most prisoners are serving a sentence issued by a state court for an offense under state law, not federal. It's a really large number, and it's very concerning considering the number of pregnancies that take place, the number of heinous circumstances that can result from this, and in fact have resulted from them. I see my time has expired. I've got other questions to ask you on this and other topics, including implementation of the First Step Act. I will submit those in writing. Thank you.